Hello, and welcome to Conversations about Language Teaching. I'm Dr. Diane Neubauer, she, her pronouns.
And I am Dr. Reed Riggs, he, him.
And today we are not officially saying anybody's leading this, although if listeners maybe don't even notice what's the difference, we both talk a lot about the topic that we have brought up. That's the reason we started doing this podcast. But we have, as a topic, we want to talk about comprehension as a goal of language teaching and learning, and putting that really high up on the radar of language teachers. So comprehension as a goal of its own, not as a means necessarily only to get to another goal of production or some type of production.
Before we jump into that and explore more deeply, do you want to talk about our Q&A episode?
Oh, yes. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we have occasionally heard from folks who have listened and have topic ideas or specific questions or want to respond to something they heard in an episode. And we don't really have a social media site set up for that. But you are welcome to email us. And we do want to do an actual episode with questions and answers. Possibly what comes in, maybe it'll be a whole episode that's really focused around one complex question. Maybe it'll be shorter questions and we just have a few thoughts and we'll group them. So if you have thoughts like that and you'd like us to address them in this particular idiomatic way that we have of talking about things, our email address is conversationsaboutlanguage, all spelled out, no spaces, no dots, no anything, conversationsaboutlanguage@gmail.com. Anything
Great.
you want to add about that?
No, I'm just looking forward to questions and seeing what we can talk about.
Yeah.
It'll be fun.
Likewise.
Okay,
and
so
I've got a couple kind
yeah.
of saved away from some that people told me in person. So
we can that
too.
maybe you could write them down, or we could just include them on a list and look at them together. It'll be fun to be surprised by questions too. I really like thinking on the spot. So I think our plan is to not plan. Our plan is to not look at them and discuss them in advance.
We'll
see
like
them.
we do in this format. Like it might be a topic we've discussed in the past, but
sure.
We haven't prepared a discussion. We're going to build off of each other as we go.
Yeah. Yep. Comprehension as a goal. So it seems to be normal that when teachers talk about comprehension, it's usually in the context of, to have serving the purpose of providing input, building a language system in the heads of the learners. I've seen input a little bit used in a funny way. Maybe this is a separate topic, but I'll just mention it here that from a conversation analysis, from an interactional perspective, that an input is like the thing that the teacher says to the student so that the student can give a response. That might be like a surface level social interactional definition of what's going on when teachers are interacting with students. But we also don't mean that here either. We're not talking about that. What we really want to see more emphasized is students being able to listen and show pretty accurate understanding, and read and show pretty accurate understanding as a really like a highly elevated goal, like way up on the list of we're trying to get students to be able to read, to listen. And the listening doesn't have to be extended one way listening. Like interaction relies on listening. Interaction relies on your showing. Not that, I don't want to say that there's just one comprehension. You have to get that it's just right or wrong, black and white. It's that you are showing what they call it intersubjectivity, which means that the two of you are sharing an understanding space where you're close enough to what each other mean that you're able to sustain interacting with each other.
Right.
And it's when someone says, "Oh, hey, did you want to do that?" And you say, "Oh, go to the beach." And they say, "No, I'm not even talking about that. Why would you think I said going to the beach?" It breaks down it breaks down interaction when you're so far off. And so we're not saying that comprehension is exact. We're just saying that your interpretation needs to be close to the interpretation intended by the other person.
And we measure that by looking at the way that the people continue to interact.
Yeah.
So if they treat it like, yeah, you got it now, or they don't treat it as problematic in some way, then we're going to say they're interpreting well enough
Yeah.
to keep going in that. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
and we can call that accurate. We can call it accurate. We're not implying that there was only one understanding to begin with, but we are
right.
saying that we can call it accurate if it's unproblematic to the interaction, so they can keep talking. And that's just one place where listening happens. It's also watching a movie, listening to a song, and understanding, like, or watching a TED talk or a speech or a YouTube video. There's so many places where comprehension is just so foundational and fundamental.
Yep. Yep. So we are thinking primarily of use of language orally and receptive hearings, like listening skills and things like that, rather than reading comprehension in this episode,
Sure.
at least as I see it.
Yeah,
So
let's focus on
reading
listening.
comprehension being a key, critical, wonderful goal of its own as well, but
Yeah.
thinking in terms of
Sure.
oral comprehension of language,
Yeah, let's
of a
focus.
new language,
Yeah.
or an additional language to the learner.
Yeah. There was a study I asked you to pull up before. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about this finding from Karen Lichtman from TPRS classrooms? Because it was it was about, I asked you, I think the way I asked you just, 10 minutes ago was, do you have quick access to the study from Karen Lichtman from about 6 years ago? Because I have a
Yeah.
memory from about 6 years ago that I still think about. And I don't know if my memory is really accurate, but it was about listening, that listening scores were weaker than other outcomes.
With TPRS compared to control groups
Yeah,
specifically.
yeah.
Yeah, and so
That's
we're
what it
thinking
was.
classic TPRS 1.0.
Sure.
We're comparing to more grammar, translation, and audiolingual method kinds of
Yeah. A
quote
traditional
unquote
classroom type.
communicative,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
not really. And yeah,
Sure,
so
sure.
yeah, I did find the maybe the summary. So this is not Karen Lichtman's own study, but her summary and review of many, many different studies about specifically TPRS methodology in language classrooms and some of the findings others have had. So she says here in summary on page 308, this is from an appendix of the final edition of Fluency Through TPR Storytelling, I think,
By
by
Ray
Blaine Ray
and
and
Conti
Conti Seeley.
Seeley. Yeah.
So that was, I think, published in 2019. So when you said 5 years ago, I
Mm,
think that was it.
mm.
So this is, she says, TPRS advantage, TPRS performs another teaching method. Oh, sorry, these are the summaries. Either there was an advantage to TPRS equal mixed results where some scores were higher for TPRS students, others with a different methodology came out higher. And then there could be also a TPRS disadvantage. Another teaching method would outperform TPRS completely. So there was, I want to say there's no studies to date that have a definite disadvantage for TPRS.
Yeah.
21 studies show an advantage for TPRS. And then some, about 6 studies, show mixed results. And that was where some of those showed listening comprehension a little bit weaker on the TPRS group compared to a control group. So
I just
again,
Googled, do you have page numbers on your copy?
yeah, that
Okay,
was
so
page 308 and then 309. I
hey, look at
scanned
310. Is
next.
there a graph on 310? I have another document I just searched up on
There
my
is.
computer. Okay, we're looking at the same one then.
Yeah,
Okay, I did.
there we
I
go.
already had it. Okay.
And now I see it.
So the TPRS advantage, and it's a little bit weaker compared to reading, speaking. Really the reading and the speaking are the top outperformers to show the TPRS advantage. But then listening was a little bit more
Vocabulary as well
weak.
in this.
Was the biggest.
Yeah.
Vocabulary and reading were the biggest.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what these numbers here indicate. I'd have to read it more thoroughly, but
Right, number of studies where the advantage was
okay.
TPRS.
So 9 studies found TPRS had the advantage for vocabulary and for reading. 8 studies, TPRS had the advantage for speaking. I should mention what, it was 3 studies that showed equal between traditional and TPRS for vocabulary. And then 1 study showed an advantage for traditional for vocabulary. It's a complex bunch of comparisons, but what caught my attention
She's looking at a
was
lot of studies. Yeah.
it was in the listening though. The listening had, I'll read these ones out. So this was 5 studies showed TPRS had the advantage over traditional teaching methods for listening. And then 8 of the studies showed they were equal And then 2 of the studies showed that the traditional method had better listening outcomes. And so it's that kind of, more equal than not equal to me shows like something's going on with listening. Um, so
Yeah.
my thinking on this, when I saw that, I really wanted to figure out like, if TPRS is so much about input and listening, shouldn't listening, score the highest? Shouldn't listening be like the first advantage? I think that listening is different things. That often
Yeah.
what's happening in a TPRS classroom, if they're following the normal way TPRS teachers are trained and how it's modeled and how it's described in the book of going slow, sheltering vocabulary, um, following those practices, that's probably very different from hearing a more naturalistic recording or having the teacher read off some sentences that are a little more complex, or you're not
Out
used
of
to that
context,
kind of, yeah, and out of
perhaps.
context too. Well, that's another
Hmm.
thing. Yeah, during class, you've got your ongoing story that's always providing context.
Yeah,
Whereas
you've got a
oftentimes
real
in an
clear.
assessment, yeah. So I don't know what the assessments
Yeah.
were, and that's the other
And
problem. Yeah,
that's a big deal. I don't know because these are all different studies and this
yeah,
is a very short summary of it. But
yeah,
yeah, if they were testing based on more naturalistic kinds of spoken language that the students needed to interpret, then
yeah,
I could totally see where, depending on the proficiency level of the students too, what would be the challenge point.
yeah,
So yeah.
yeah. Also,
And
and yeah,
why we're want to just toss out the idea, why are we particularly mentioning TPRS? Because there is clear research on that.
yeah,
and it's hard, like Karen Lichtman has talked about this, and why did she choose to focus on this in this review rather than comprehensible input kinds of based teaching? Because it's very clearly there was a method, there was some pretty clear procedural things that were consistent. If you were saying you were doing TPRS, more so at least than compared to the wide range of people who might use some kind of aspect of comprehensible input as the basis of their teaching.
yeah,
So we're talking about that, not to pick on them, but
yeah.
because there's something we can say about it clearly, because there's been some comparative studies before.
That was her. Yeah. So one useful part of looking at her study is because, like she says, we kind of know more about the experience of the learner. And second, because there's so much emphasis on input and listening, but then the listening outcomes aren't as strong as the other reading and vocabulary and speaking. And so that to me is the curiosity there. Um, so
Yeah.
I
Motivation, attitudes were
measured
a
too, and
little
motivation was also
preference to PRS,
yeah,
and grammar
grammar was stronger
testing
too.
was
Yep,
stronger. Yeah.
yep. So yeah, you've all these winning studies showing that TPRS had an advantage, but then why would listening be lower? Um, I think that there's more to be said about that. So, slow listening versus fast listening isn't just a difference of speed. That natural speech leaves out sounds. It's not the same. And so when I've had students say, when we watch little YouTube, like actual, real, authentic YouTube videos together, I'll choose a short one so that it is reasonable for us to be learning from. So like a little news clip about the Chinese New Year. They're naming off the famous cuisine regions of China and showing a dish for it. It's very visual. Like I'm very careful in what I choose, and I make sure that the timing of it, the visuals, everything makes sense. And from there, I can scaffold it as well.
Mhm.
So my students have often asked, like, "Oh, it's so fast. Like, the news anchors are speaking so fast. Can you slow it down for us?" And even I don't do it anymore, but when I have, it's the sounds that were left out are not put back in when you slow it down.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that listening, for trying to prepare students to be lifelong learners, like to get out in the world and not be, so scared and shy of interacting with people. Fast listening for me is one of my goals. It's not a top goal, but it's peppered in. Where I'm like, oh, by the way, let's train our ears a little bit. Here's
Mhm.
some normal news. We're going to hear it 100 times because that's how fast it is. We're going to break it down. I have
Yeah.
text supporting it. We're going to do it. We're going to act it out. It's very short. It's like extremely short, so we can handle it. But
Yep.
students have to
And
kind of be ready for that. Yeah.
that repeated listening with more naturalistic input is something that, like, Judith Dubois has done a lot. She calls it narrow listening. And we can link to that as well as Karen Lichtman's chapter. But Judith's idea is that by doing a very scaffolded process of re-listening and re-listening with students. You can go from that fast, whoa, what was that even about, to helping break it down and to hear those things so that you can get to the end of the exercise is about this, and then you can hear again and understand and really catch the meaning from the sounds that you hear. So narrow listening can be one way to approach that if you want to build in both the skill of fast listening and the ability to parse where are those words and what sounds truly are missing, but you can still interpret and understand accurately.
There's kind of a metaphor here. I don't think everyone will relate to this, but I started playing Super Mario Brothers when I was 5 years old. My dad brought home a Nintendo. And one of the things I learned early in childhood with Mario is that if he's running, he'll run over gaps. He just keeps running as if there's no gaps there. He just keeps going. Right. But if he's walking speed, he just falls down into the gap. And so I think listening, it's a similar thing, and it comes with a mindset, a sort of attitude and expectations of, okay, I'm like, okay, big picture. I'm listening for the context and some keywords. Okay. And not that you would say those words in your head, but that's what you're doing. Like that's what normal listening is. And I've noticed my students, after we've kind of broken down and explained what the people in the video were saying, then when we play it again, some of my students will go, oh, whoa, I understood that. Like, oh, wow.
Yeah, it feels great when you can do that.
Feels great. Yep. The other thing I've been doing is after so in the IB system, MYP, middle year program 1 through 5 is grades 6 through 10. And I teach middle year program called MYP 9 and 10. Oh, no, sorry, grades 9 and 10. Those are MYP 4 and 5. And for them, we're supposed to do a lot of very hands-on things. And so they do poster presentations about the topics and the inquiry that we're doing in our unit. And we spend so much time going over and over doing like little formative assessments with news articles and with little video clips. And we go through them. We might act them out. We might ask questions about them. But by the time they get to their poster presentation, they've finished talking. And then I do a follow-up Q&A about what they just said. So while they're talking, I'm writing little notes about what they just said. And then I ask some questions, something I've kind of slipped into. And I noticed that I'm doing it, but I don't think of it as very intentional. It's a little intentional, but I'm a little more relaxed now, and I'm not trying as hard to go slow because I'm talking about the things and using the same words that we've been talking about and words we've been using the entire unit for like, a month and a half. And so like we talk about 工作 constantly in I have a language at work unit. We're talking about languages people need for different jobs. And we just do lots of little case studies and news reading, discussing, and we do personalization. We make up fictitious things about lizard people. But they know 工作. Most of them know 工作, that word by the end. And so
which means work.
Which means work in Chinese. And so when they've just finished their poster presentation, I have this little crutch that I trust is that word 工作, and also some question words like 什么 and 谁. And they were pretty slow to get used to those. They're good now, but
take a while.
They take a while. I don't know why question words take a long time, but
consistently that's been a thing, like all the way till the spring of their first year of teaching Chinese in a high school program. That was I wasn't seeing consistent responsiveness. I would still go back and point to the word on the wall and show what the meaning was.
But for me, it was like a year and a half.
Chinese.
Because I'd say like, 他想做什么, which means what does he want to do? And the student would go, 对, meaning yes or correct. And I go, and I walk over to my poster and point to it. Okay, 什么, like what?
Yeah.
And they go, oh, okay. So now they get it. 什么时候 is one that most of them have caught on to, which means when.
That one takes time.
Took a long time. Yeah. And so I have these sort of key words that I'll lean into where I can trust that I can speak more quickly because I just want them to listen for that word and know the context of the presentation that they just gave. Like they are the ones who just provided that context. It's closest to them. I'm pointing to the little images on their poster and I'm saying like, oh, 这个人, it's like this person. I'm pointing while I say it. 他做什么工作? What job does he do? And they're not always quick, but we get through it. And it's a healthy amount of struggle that is, I don't think there's much anxiety. It's a really quick, like, huh? Oh, right. And then they'll look at it. It's like that kind of, it's not fluid, but it's a healthy amount of disfluency. Then the interaction keeps going. It's like they're not at a grinding halt. It's a
Right.
little like,
They're
oh, I
getting a
get it.
little
And then
stretch.
the little stretch.
Hmm.
It's a little stretch. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
um,
Achievable challenge, you might
yeah.
say.
So I sort of pepper in fast listening, I guess, within our interaction just by knowing that there's if the context is pretty clear and I'm using some words that I trust that they know and they show me that they understand, then we can proceed. Sometimes I have to break it, I have to exit the L2 interaction. I have to go into English for a moment just to clarify or ask them like if they're totally stuck,
Which
what is my
part?
question?
Yeah.
What am I asking you? And they're like, something about the thing. And I'm like, that's okay, no. I'm just asking what work he does. And like, oh, and then they're back on track. So then we go right back
Right.
into using Chinese. They're interacting with me again. The questions make sense. And my students just yesterday commented, they're like, oh, whoa, that was like real Chinese. Like you were just really interacting
Hmm.
with her. And I said, yeah, it's cool how it
Yeah.
feels when
Yeah.
like we're sticking to simple words, but it's turn by turn by turn by turn by turn by turn. Like that interaction keeps going back and forth because it's her familiar poster, familiar topic, familiar words. And it feels really good to the students, even just observing to be like, oh, whoa,
Hmm.
that was really cool.
Yeah. It's
So,
fluent. It's
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
It's a good goal of its own. Yeah.
yeah. I think
Yeah.
people
It's the
recognize
students being able to
interaction.
keep up.
Yeah.
Hmm.
People, when they see
Yeah.
interaction, they go, oh, I don't know what that was, but it was cool. Yeah.
Yes, I agree. I agree. And are you ready for a little turn of
Sure.
the conversation?
Yeah.
What I was going to say was I think that the piece of that success that is oral comprehension is often off the radar of folks. The learner might not feel it. The language teacher might not see it as part of their direct goal. They might value it as a means to an end of getting students to be able to produce and output. And so it's really interesting to me. I'm thinking of two or three things. One was a really outstanding keynote talk by Florencia Henshaw at the Kentucky World Language Association a couple months ago, in fall of 2024. And one of the things that she was discussing was why is it that language teachers are so rushing to output and so concerned about accuracy of output, early output, lots of things about the output and not perceiving the value of the comprehension and the input and those things as part of what we're measuring, what we're seeking to develop in our students. And so she was saying things like output feels more active and listening and input based, receptive skills, interpret of messages isn't as obvious on the radar of folks because you don't see them do it. It's internal, it's quiet.
Yeah.
But yeah, so she had a great list that I don't have the ability to call entirely to mind right now, but I will see if there's a way to perhaps link to something by her that's on the same topic, because I thought it was so insightful and it was compassionately done too, where of course, language teachers are about assessment grades. I mean, we're teachers in school, so we have to do something to show that our students are able to achieve. And one of the ways that's kind of easier to measure and easier to sense is the production ability. As I've been doing teacher education courses with world language and with future ESL teachers, both of those groups of folks often have that tendency of like, I want to make the students produce language, speak language. And that's where they'll really learn it. And it's trying to help them understand the huge amount and the high value. It not just the huge amount of input that they need to get to that, but that there's a value in understanding and interpreting messages. And I think it's partly intercultural learning that is one of the goals for that kind of comprehension. So it's not merely, oh, we're plugging in input messages so that we build this mental system for the students and then they
It's
can
just language,
produce
right?
output.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
no, we're
Yeah.
talking about being able to interpret
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
and cultural backgrounds and all those sorts of things. Like that level of comprehension is
Yeah.
something that I think is really valuable too,
I have a
and
quick
is also overlooked
I have a quick
sometimes. So,
example that just came up. I have a video from my juniors. We're getting into the unit experience, and I found this video of an interview in I think in Shanghai, and it's an old man who used to live in America, a Chinese man lived in America. He's I think retired in Shanghai now, And so the interview is a young guy, and he says, "Okay, so Mr. Gao, um, you've lived in America and China. Can you give us a comparison of both and what's good and maybe like tredian, like what's lacking in both?" And so then the old man shares a story. He says, "Yeah, in America, you work in your job, and when you go to the HR department, you ask them if you're sick, you ask for leave, and you'll be gone a day, and then you're gone another day." And no one checks on you. Like no one even, and you come back, no one asks, no one comes over and asks. And in China, it's like, "Hey, what do how you been? Like, how's your body? How's your health? You're doing okay?" Okay, so we got to that part, and now I'm trying more or less to recreate the sequence of that video because my students at that point, it's just American, some nice kids, they were like, "Oh, he's making fun of Americans?" And I said,
Mhm.
"No, no, no, no." And someone
Yeah.
jumped in and said, "I think he's doing an impression of Chinese people in China." And they're like, "Yeah, but he didn't say that." And I said, "People jump around in topics a lot. And given the context, that's my strong interpretation is his impression is how Chinese people would act if he came back to work, even though he didn't
Right.
directly say in China, they say blah, blah, blah." And
Right.
they were saying, "Oh, but he's saying that America has this problem." And I say, "No, he's saying that he felt lonely in America.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's it.
It
He
had a
just,
consequence for him that was,
yeah,
yeah.
he's not bad mouthing America. But to me, like that level of interpretation, interpretation of meaning, it wasn't a language problem. I mean, you could say, I guess it's a pragmatic level problem, but more so, it's just like you just have to get ready. You have to get used to the topics people talk about when they
Mhm.
use language. It's like part
And the way they
of
do it.
part
Yeah.
of the learning. Yeah, part of so that intercultural part. Um, if you're not doing it in the classroom, then you're not preparing students for it. They might on
Yeah.
their own, but you're not doing
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that ability to step back and go, "Ooh, I felt uncomfortable with that thing," or, "Oh, I think it means this."
Mhm.
Can we teach students to pause, to reflect, to listen again, to think a little bit bigger picture instead of to jump right into a
Yeah.
conclusion and fill in the blank or produce a response? Like,
Yeah.
can we
Sure.
just let them sit with stuff a little bit more? I think that's valuable too.
Sure.
The other thing from the um, comments from students who are MA level learning about teaching English as a second language in the US context, particularly, or their mindsets very much there. The thing that they talk about in terms of like, well, to be really skilled at a language, you have to be able to um, read, write, and speak well. And like,
Hmm.
hello,
Hello.
what about
What
the
happened to the
listening
listening?
comprehension, which I
Right.
would argue is the basis from which all those other skills can develop? That it's
Sure.
very rare not to
Yeah.
have like listening. I know some people develop
Yeah.
ability to interpret reading, but they're not.
Yeah.
I think it's not ideal when you don't have a connection to the oral language.
Yeah.
So, yeah, helping students, helping teachers recognize that
Yeah.
skill of interpretive listening,
Sure.
of listening comprehension, of
Yeah.
receptive
I in
interpretation build.
yeah.
It's
In
it's
this in
valuable.
in my own introspection, so this isn't based on research or actual like in the moment observation, but my thinking back on my life, and thinking back on people I've seen. So this is, very, it's an opinion I'm going to share, but it does affect my teaching. Um, to me personally, um, being a good listener, has a couple meanings there, but that's probably more, to me, it's more important than all the other skills.
Mhm.
Um, so if you're a good reader, let's in a magic world where you can, maybe a high tech future where you can upload one of these skills. But you could choose one to start with. You have to wait a while for your brain to cool off. You could upload the next one next. Let's say it's like every 5 years you can do one. Okay, so which one would you do first? Well, let's say it's reading. Okay, so for the next 5 years, you'll be great at reading, but you can't talk to anyone, you can't understand anyone, and you can't write anything. It's just you're really good at reading. There's some people who would say, "Oh, I would love to get away from it all and just read." Okay, to me that sounds like a traumatized. That sounds like trauma.
Yeah, that
Um,
sounds like
that
somebody
sounds
needs,
like
yeah,
okay,
to,
something's going on. Okay, so then I can speak. To me, that's like the worst personality, or it's something
and
that we
never
all
to
try to.
hear.
Someone who just talks all the time and doesn't listen. Oh, that's
Yeah.
that's a problem. Like that to me is like a bad colleague, a bad friend. Um, I wouldn't want that at all. Unless you just don't use it, but then what's the point? So it's like I chose speaking and then I suddenly realized that I shouldn't talk over other people constantly. So I'm not going to use my skill. I'll wait for the next 5 years. Writing, writing is nice, but again, if you're writing something and you can't understand anyone's responses, I don't know what you would do in a vacuum with that. So to me, like being able to stand in a circle of people or attend a meeting at work or listen to a phone message, you could be a translator. You understand the target language, translate for people into the your own language, your first language or their language. So like to me, that's the one that has the most social value
Yeah.
is being a good listener, and that has some behavioral properties as well. People would say like, oh, good listening, you're showing that you're listening, body posture and eye contact and things like that, head nodding maybe, um, and getting other people to feel comfortable talking to you.
Yeah.
So these are all parts of it. And then there's the language comprehension part, being pretty accurate in your in
Right.
your interpretation of what you're hearing.
Yeah. These are all very integrated
Right.
in
They
that
go
out.
together.
Um, and I think to take a little turn then, so how does that develop for students in a world where they are so used to their tech devices
Mm.
and attention spans are even shorter. The book, The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
haven't read it yet, but I've heard an
Mhm.
interview with him.
Mhm.
We're talking about real neurological changes in
Mhm.
children because
Mhm.
they're being raised with devices that have really reworked the way that their brains work compared
Mhm.
to previous generations. So if we have children like that, how do we then develop this sort of skill of listening? And I think it's that scaffolded little steps at a time
Yeah,
success and telling them the success, letting them know this is a worthy goal that will help you, that will make you a better person, that
sure.
will help you in this class and
Mhm.
out of this class.
Yeah,
And so building with them the ability to get stamina to
sure.
listen longer,
Yeah,
to have the curiosity to question and not jump to conclusions too quickly.
yeah, yeah.
All of those are
But
part, I think, of the
yeah,
great thing that we can do as language teachers.
sure. Kids on
Those incidental
devices, though,
skills.
aren't only texting with each other. They're also watching
Right,
lots of TikTok and
right,
YouTube and shorts and
right.
reels. And those understanding language, keeps you
Yeah,
engaged with
yeah,
it.
that's part of it. Hmm.
Um, but yeah, yeah. So I don't know. And kids do usually do have social. Also, texting with each other isn't the same as reading long form writing, and that might
Right.
be
And
a
it's a
a
language
new
kind of an
category.
expressive ability of its own, like
Sure.
shorthand stuff and emojis and all the
What was
little
often
things
happening
that go
when
with
we
that.
banned phones in our school for the high school this year, it was banned last year for middle school. But what the teachers were saying in our big faculty meetings is that it's not enough to ask students just to put their phones in their backpacks because there's often it's not the social media, it's the private text groups where they're gossiping about a classmate and everyone wants to
Mhm.
check in on what's been said so far. That's an
Yeah.
interpretive, that's not producing anything. You're just checking what's been said so far. So again, it's an interpretive skill. That's a kind of
Yeah.
a form of reading. But it again, to every time I think this through in my own introspection on the matter, it seems like interpretive skills are the important ones, more important at least. Do you have to get up in
Right.
front of an audience and make a speech sometimes? Yeah, sometimes.
Yeah.
But again, it's the sometimes. It's not the constant. And if someone asks you a question after your speech and you're like, "Oh, thank you, I got to go," I don't know how
Yeah.
impactful was your speech if you can't handle a single follow-up question.
Right. Right.
Interpreting again. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. And again, to bring it back to a kind of an intercultural learning, I mean, by focusing on the skills of being able to listen with comprehension and interpret others' meanings in messages.
that
Um,
too.
I
Yeah,
think it's helping them to learn the slower reflective practice of like,
sure.
yeah,
The
it's
bigger
just
takeaway.
good. It's
Yeah.
good all the way around.
It is, yeah, yeah. Teaching social, helping socialize, helping people get
Yeah.
socialized. Um, well, this is good. Is there anything else we want to add on this topic? I think we've made our case that comprehension needs to be high on the list of goals for language
Hmm.
teachers, and not just see it
Yeah.
as, when I hear people say things like you need a large amount of input before you get a trickle of output. To me, you're
Right.
missing like you're implying that the end goal is just about output. Or I've talked to people like just people in the world, not language teachers, not educators, not students, but they just find out that I'm a teacher of language, and they'll say, oh yeah, well, of course the end goal is that students can speak. And it's like that's just a public,
It's
it's
just
just
a part.
it's a default
Yeah.
perception that like the whole goal. But again, I think
Yeah.
that, like you were saying earlier, I think production sells
Mhm.
because it's visible right up front on the outside. You can watch someone talking,
Yeah.
and
It's easier to assess as
easier to
a
assess.
teacher.
It looks impressive. Yeah.
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 Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And just to mention about that, it's been attributed as a quote, that thing about the trickle of
Oh,
output, a flood of input precedes a trickle of output, something
okay.
like that.
Yeah.
That is not something that Win Wong actually said, but I
Hmm.
have seen people attribute it to her a number of times. And apparently
Interesting.
Robert Harrell tracked it down and she
Yeah.
said, no, and I would nuance that.
Mm.
And so
Mm.
that
Cool.
it was a little oversimplification from her perspective too. So,
Yeah.
so don't attribute that to
Yeah.
Dr. Wong at the Ohio State University.
Okay.
If you
Sure.
see that quote, it's spurious.
Okay.
I don't know how it came about, but
Yeah.
I used to think it was hers
I
too.
see. My sense, I just heard it a lot, and I just thought that it's something teachers kind of created among each other and kept saying.
Yeah.
That sounds more like maybe what it
Yeah,
might have
it
been.
kind of gets repeated again and
Yeah.
again.
So I don't want to downplay the importance of comprehension as a means to building mental representation of language and the ability to interact with people. It
Mhm.
is in our view, it very much
Yeah,
is.
yeah. It's the
It's just
basis.
not only that. It's like it should also be one of the most prized outcomes is someone can be a good listener.
Right.
Okay,
Alrighty.
let's close this one off. So,
Yep. And then
uh,
just want to mention again,
yep,
if you have question and answer, or for the question and answer episode that we'll plan to do soon, I think we were talking about maybe episode 21 would be that.
this is
This
episode
one
right
is,
now,
this is 19.
19.
And so write to us at conversationsaboutlanguage@gmail.com.
Yeah. Any questions about your classroom,
Mhm.
how things work, how
The whole
language
range. Yeah.
works? We'll do, yeah, anything related to language teaching. That's our purview, and it's intentionally broad.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.